Hello, boils and ghouls. Welcome to this week's episode of Hallow Weekly. George and not Nick here with Nightmare Alley, 1947. Why not Nick? Co-host Nick is sick, possibly because he likes to do things that rhyme. I guess I should be glad that his name's not like Seth or Buck or something. But Nick, hope you feel better. We wanted to get this episode up on time for y'all because there's a lot of discussion about Guillermo del Toro's remake of Nightmare Alley, if it is a remake, and unfortunately, everyone you guys are missing out on Nick's Guillermo del Toro expertise because he's way more knowledgeable about that director than me. But I'm super passionate about this movie at hand, 1947. So I'll do my best for you. But since there's a lot of buzz about that movie, we don't want this movie to go past by unspoken of the original because it is one of the truly great films of all time. It's possibly my favorite noir. I think of it as kind of a horror noir, just like I think of High Plains Drifter as horror western, right? But this movie. If this movie has a character named Ezra Grindle, if you have characters named Xena Crumbine and Ezra Grindle, and one just called the Geek, it's got horrific elements for sure. If you don't know about this original film, the 1947 film, it's starring Tyrone Power as Stan Carlisle, who's like an ambitious but morally bankrupt carny worker who picks up tricks for a sideshow mentalist named Xena, who has an alcoholic partner named Pete. And after there's like a moonshine accident and some possible jail time being threatened to the characters by the local sheriff, Stan kind of reveals who he is to everyone by his actions. He gets forced like into a relationship or a marriage with Molly somehow, but they kind of figure out the system that Xena and Pete have, so they get to up level now in crime, and they become huge or bigger, more high profile con artists. It's really unusual to center a film with such a wholesome actor as Tyrone Power with this, and this is where I'm really passionate about Nightmare Alley, because Tyrone Power really took the biggest chance any actor of his stature had taken, possibly in the history of Hollywood up to that point. So anytime you're the first at something, right? Like you're a trailblazer, you break new ground, like John Carpenter did with Halloween and showing that horror could be that big of hits, or Blair Witch Project just blowing everything up. This movie was a huge gamble for Tyrone Power. It's basically like, imagine Tom Hanks playing a darker version of the Jack Torrance character from The Shining, right? Like, but early on in his career, before we knew that Tom Hanks could do those things, because that's what Tyrone Power did here. He had been really, really successful in Hollywood with a film called The Razor's Edge. They wanted, pirate swashbuckling, epic romantic adventures. They wanted him to basically just play romantic leads, and he had really pushed for this project, and it failed miserably, like epically failed at the time. So it didn't make any money, which Daryl Zanuck, who was supposed to be, guiding the movie to fruition, who kind of walked away from it because he figured it was doomed. So it really did become a Tyrone Power project. He was the engine and the driving force behind a lot of why this movie exists. And he was super proud of it, but it failed. And then he stopped, even thinking or talking about it really publicly because it was embarrassing. And now it's considered his greatest performance, of course, because you got to take huge gambles like that to succeed, right? So this movie really, really broke ground. And one way that you can tell that it breaks ground is that there are multiple amazing parts for women, like major characters, which is unusual to see three starring basically roles against one, maybe 1.5 for the men. So it was breaking ground there, but it was also breaking ground in the anti-hero thing that we're super used to now. But they pull no punches with this, and part of it is because the source material, the novel it's based on, is super dark, which Nick and I had talked about because I'm also super passionate about the book. So we'll get to that in a second. But and it kind of blew Nick's mind that the business card of the author of this book, which I'll try to describe, even though this is an audio medium, it would be better visual. But so the anti-heroes here, no punches pulled. Tyrone Power is playing this guy who is completely manipulative, completely amoral for most of the movie. Arguably, at the end, he might take a small turn, but he's also kind of going toe to toe with some, especially Lilith, who's played incredibly by Helen Walker, who arguably, not arguably, she just flat out outplays his character and ends up really the winner, even though somewhat villainous as well, which, I mean, right, every character named Lilith in the 40s must have been a villain. So she outplays him, pretty well and pretty without regard for right and wrong or morals or whatnot. So I just don't consider her quite as villainous as him because her rationale for what she was doing made so much more sense than his. His was like completely self-motivated mayhem he was causing, whereas she kind of saw that this had come to her as a possibility, this criminal side of things or whatever. And she turned out to have a great talent for it, but I don't think she was seeking it out. He's been seeking it out the entire movie. But so, there's these incredible characters where there's no punches pulled, but the end of it, the end of this movie, kind of the fall of Stan is really happens at the end, and it is so hard hitting and emotional and interesting and well filmed and strikingly like presented, where you're seeing visuals that you wouldn't forget if you're paying attention and you love movies. Especially if you love dark messages or people who are just trying to present an unvarnished truth. This movie is for you for sure, but it's incredible that in my memory, this whole sequence would probably, if you'd made me guess in advance, I would have said it was about a 25-minute sequence. The fall of Stan. It's 4 damn minutes. It loomed so large in my memory from the last time I had watched it, and it's so affecting. It just felt like its own little world. It felt like it took way longer than what at the time it ultimately turned out to be. But I'm telling you, even then, I had to, if I wasn't checking the timestamp because I realized, wow, this feels much shorter than whatever. If I wasn't in an analytic mind, if I had just rewatched it without the podcast in mind, it would happen again. I wouldn't have paid any attention except for what was happening on the screen because it is hypnotic and super interesting. But his fall, because Tyrone Power is such a masterful con artist through much of this, but I think the real kind of beating heart of what the dark thing this movie is that lives inside this movie, to me, what it's trying to get across is what's tempting to think of as just a simple circle, right? Stan is a great con artist. He's playing everyone else in his life, and then there's this amazing scene at the end where he's broke, he's on the run, He's in rags, basically. He's gone from his tuxedo, limo days to fallen back even worse to the carny state that we had met him in. And he's just disheveled and a mess, and obviously just completely addicted to alcohol at this point and poisoned by it. And he's kind of holding court, Falstaff style, with a bunch of other drunks. And he's telling them the same tale that he's been telling throughout the whole movie when he's manipulating people or playing them or playing a mind game on them, etc. And while he's kind of caught up in his own silver-tongued, like he's starting to feel a little bit like himself again, even though he still looks terrible, the drunks steal his last remaining alcohol. So instead of him getting something from someone else during or after he tells his misdirecting con artist tale, this time he plays himself, and they take advantage of it, and he's the one who loses out, and that's how far he's fallen, is that he can't con anymore. And you would think that would be it, right? That a lesser movie that would be, it would be the O. Henry Tales from the Crypt, karma, character gets what they deserve. But this movie has a lot darker things on its mind. So at the real shocking dark turn at the end that this movie takes, even though due to interference, I think it pulls its very last punch, but it reminds me of, I think 1932, but Freaks, Todd Browning's Freaks. Like, it feels very similar in its impact. But, we've got him in the circle where he's playing himself. Then he goes and gets a job as a carny again, but he's a wreck now, so he can't do any of the clever, deft things he can do before. So he ends up getting the job as a geek, which, was foreshadowed at the beginning of the movie. And a geek is an awful state where they're pretending to be some kind of freak that eats live animals, in this case, live chickens. And when the carny says, "Oh, on second thought, we have a job for you. Don't leave. Don't walk out the door. Here, come get a drink. We do have a job. Now that I think about it, it's the geek. Do you know what a geek is?" And what Tyrone Power does in that scene when they ask him what a geek is, and you see how deeply in his soul he realizes that he's known the entire time what a geek is, right? And that it was headed for him like a meteor. But he takes the job as the geek, right? So the carny tells his story, "Oh, we don't have jobs. Oh, we're hard up. We have no positions. Oh, you know what? As a favor, I think there's a thing, right? You're getting, Tyrone Power's getting played like he's been playing everybody else, conning everybody else, the whole movie. Just like any employee who's like bright-eyed and thinks a company is great and, hears from outside the company it's great and they present themselves as great, and you get in and working there as a shit show and it's like hellish, right? Like, you're getting played. So he's getting played by this carny, but he knows it. And it turns out, I think, that it's better, it's more powerful to just be a person in authority or represent authority or be on top randomly, whatever that power is. It's more powerful to do that than be a good con artist, right? Because the good con artists, which is what Tyrone Power was at the beginning, and what the psychologist is, even though she's probably headed down a really dark path, and Xena and the people he's seen and experienced, but particularly himself, they've been getting over, on people conning them in a polished tuxedo-wearing style, or at least that's where it turns or whatever. But they all lose. Like, ultimately, they all lose, except for arguably the psychologist. But they're all losing. They won the battle, but they lost the war, right? But who won the war? This guy, who's not even a good con artist. Like, he's telling a story that Tyrone Power, in a drunk haze, sleep deprived state, still figures out that he's being conned, sees right through it. But he takes it anyway. Because it doesn't matter what kind of con artist you are, if you just are on top, right? It's just survival of the fittest. And I think that's what the movie was really trying to get to, which, for its time, the audiences were absolutely not ready for what this was, which is why it completely failed and couldn't be spoken of, and was even hard to find for a long time. This I mean, not a long time, but well, maybe a long time, but like for quite a bit of time of its existence. This was a movie that you heard about but couldn't find on video, right? Pre-internet, it was pretty hard to track down for much longer than it deserved to be, being the masterpiece that it is. The music, the visuals, like I don't want to. I get bored with podcasts talking about cinematography, and that word makes me want to, like, whatever, just in a podcast context, but part of why you're listening to this on a horror podcast is what I'm talking about now. It's the visuals. This movie is unequaled in its presentation of nighttime carnival shots and the spooky backgrounds around carnival comings and goings, and I'm even including freaks. Like there is no movie that looked more beautiful and spookier in this setting, in the carnival setting, than this movie. It is literally the apex of this visually, right? Which is why I'm really excited and a little nervous for the impending remake. So, but it's really dark and shadowy and just incredibly presented. So that darkness is part of it. Now, let's just wrap up with getting to the source material, which is the book, right? Part of the reason this podcast didn't pick a very specific name like movies or whatever is we wanted to talk about anything that was dark, that got our interest, that people brought to us, that we got excited about, and that they were excited about. So we talk about books. We have a book club in our Facebook group, right? So that's important to us. And this book, if ever a book that wasn't shelved in horror was actually a horror, it is this novel. It is incredibly dark. But so there's a guy online that I found named David Merbenstein, who, this is how he described the novel. He describes it: Nightmare Alley is a book as hard-hitting as any American novel written in the mid-20th century. In addition to sympathizing with misfits who inhabit its pages, the novel stares unblinkingly at premarital sex, alcoholism, adultery, exploitation of various kinds, theft, chicanery, and even then illegal abortion. That's to say nothing of its incredible language and the irresistible carny patois that peppers its prose. So, I mean, this book was taking on a lot of subjects that were really ahead of its time, or really unusual for its time. But that's not a surprise, because its author was a super dark guy. And if ever there was a horror business card that isn't American Psycho, it must be this guy. You gotta Google at some point this guy, because his novel, his business card, the author of the novel, William Gresham, his business card on one side literally says no address, no phone, no money. And then in the middle of it, it just says retired. And then the other side, like if you flip it around, I don't remember actually in American Psycho. I remember that they were admiring the cast and all that, but I don't remember if they actually flipped to the back. But the back of the card, or front of the card, whatever, no, this must be the back because the front's got more words on it, says the world rather be. Hold on. This picture is way too blurry for me. Hold on. I found this as an old timey. This was a really old timey article on this guy. You would rather die than face truth is what the back of this business card says. So again, front, no address, no phone, no money, no business. In the center, retired. No name, just blank, right? And the back, you would rather die than face the truth. So, die than face truth. He didn't even put the, because he's such a wordsmith. So, just an incredibly dark and honest author who's willing to take on really dark material. And the fact that Tyrone Power was brave enough at the time to do this is, the one of the incredible and really, like, singular things about this movie that other movies couldn't match. So this is Nightmare Alley 1947, incredibly recommended by Hell Weekly podcast. Literally, this movie has popped into my head at times I had no idea it was going to, ever since I watched it years and years and years and years and years ago. Just literally one of those movies that kind of travels with you through your life and through time if you love movies like this. So super recommended. Nick had messaged, we also want to continue to give some shout outs to the people who are following us, who are contributing to helping us pick. We're going to be back to our How Low Can We Go series next week. And a lot of people are helping us pick that. The Facebook group, we put it to a vote. A lot of interesting choices, which we'll go over in the episode. But the ultimate winner is Night of the Living Dead 1990, Tom Savini's take on Night of the Living Dead. And I'm so excited to get to that, and excited to have Nick back to do it. But also, we had wanted to kind of designate the comments of the week that were on the page or in the group or et cetera. And I just want to go over a couple of them really quick. There was a discussion that broke out first on Twitter, and then we amplified them on our page. And it was name 4 horror movie characters that you wished survived, right? So, and there's a lot of people who were, mentioning a lot of good stuff, but it was, and some of them were obviously funny and some of them were more serious, but there were some really thoughtful comments under this post, which we really appreciate. That's really why we do it. So Eric had said, Nancy Thompson's death in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors made me cry my eyes out when I was a kid. Saddest horror character death ever, which I remember that was a really, first of all, it took me by surprise at the time, whatever. So that was, and then just incredible actress. So just an incredible thing. Bernadette from Candyman got a lot of love. That was a really good call out. There are a lot of people who are just naming basically every character that died in some movies, like Lost Boys. That was pretty interesting. But I love that there were people who came on there and were just authentic with it, and gave real answers and kind of why they were. And it makes you realize how, like, those simple, it was such a simple moment in time, right? I would have never expected to go into something like, Elm Street 3, especially with Freddy getting funnier and funnier with every franchise, to have like an emotional impact from a movie. So that was really cool. And then I got to finish with Jordy Verrill from Creepshow got a lot of love too. Although if he doesn't die, then that kind of entire point gets pulled away. But you can totally see why, especially when they're all posting pictures of this poor character's face. It's unbelievable. So, all right. Thanks for putting up with this solo episode. We just wanted to make sure that Nightmare Alley got a shout out before the remake version gets more and more kind of eclipses what was old, because it's amazing stuff. And Nick will be back next week, and we'll see you then. Watch more horror movies. Stay scary.